Hey, Russell, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Tony.
Hello, Tony, Russell.
What's that?
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Right. We call this meeting to order. I'd like to acknowledge that we're here today on the traditional territory of the Lillooet people. Let's call this meeting, sorry, can I have someone move approval of the agenda of the committee of the whole, moved by Director Crompton, seconded by Director Mayor. Anyone opposed? Motion carries, and we'll turn the regional moment over to Area B.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Natalie is going to put up the Lillooet Brewing Company website on the screen. I just thought I'd share that project because in Area B, with so few resources, we have to combine forces sometimes. And with the brewery, what we did on this Lillooet Wild site is Sam Quinlan, one of the owners, came to me about 5 years ago and said, wouldn't the naturalists like to partner up with the brewery and promote some education about wildlife and habitat and stuff at risk and so forth? And we're going to tag beer with different animals. I said, yeah, good idea. I was the president at the time. That was before I came on the, so it's about 5 years. Jeff Playfair is our president now. But then we sat around with the brewery guys and the Naturalist Society and talked about which creatures would be the best. And we came up with a list of about 30. And Sam's working away on it. And some of you have seen the spotted bat and the mule deer or the western mountain bluebird. And do you want to put it up on the, thank you, Natalie. So that's our beautiful mountain bluebird that you just saw. Here's the old bridge. Glasses on. There is Sam Quinlan, the main driving force behind the brewery. And if you scroll down, you'll see some of the creatures. And whitebark pine is now listed as endangered in Canada. And it's an interesting species to us because it's beautiful, subalpine, but also a very important source of food for grizzly bear and Clark's nutcracker and squirrels and foxes and other creatures that survive out there in a fairly tough environment. And then there's the Clark's nutcracker on the right. And what we did was the naturalists applied to Northern Development Initiative Trust for a marketing grant. And with those grants, you have to match funds. And so the brewery came up with 10 grand and the naturalists committed 10 grand because you have to spend the money for NDIT and then very carefully present them with receipts for exactly what you've spent the money on in an Excel spreadsheet, just so, and they will reimburse you eventually. This is one of the problems with NDIT actually, and one of the reasons why the facade program can get not as many applications as we like. You totally need that money up front and you need to be prepared to wait for it to come back. So luckily the naturalists have a very competent treasurer. She kept track of all the receipts. The main expenses were developing this website and those caricatures of the different species at risk, and then the photographers. And my husband Ian is one of the photographers that contributed. He didn't charge, but a couple of the younger guys, Jess Finley and a couple of the other ones that we know that really do photography for a living, did contribute and actually got paid for some of the photos on the site. And what we did was tried to pick the iconic ones for Lillooet and ones that are of interest to the public, and then provide them with just a little bit of education around the habitat that the species need. I mean, this is the interest of the Naturalist Society, is to educate people about the natural world. So if you click on, say, the Clark's nutcracker, and then just show sort of how. So there's a bird that you would find, I mean, it's completely connected to pines. And white bark pine is a stone pine, and it's unique to the Pacific Northwest. And these birds are responsible for propagating the species because they come in, they take the nuts from the pine cone, they crack open the cone, and then they cache them. And they have this amazing spatial memory. They cache thousands of seeds all up there in the alpine, and they tend to cache a few in one spot. And if you've been up, I mean, you guys have all been into the alpine and you see this amazing white bark pine and these gnarly magic kind of Lord of the Rings collection, but that's because the nutcrackers have cached all of those seeds, and there's this conglomeration of trees that come up. And so that's the kind of little tidbit of information that you provide. The trees depend on the nutcrackers and vice versa. It's a symbiotic relationship. And then there's some nice pictures. And hopefully, if you scroll down, there's a learn more section. And yeah, where it lives, conservation concerns, what you can do, become an expert. So maybe go back, keep going down. And so obviously, one of my favorites is a spotted bat and stout beer that I've been promoting. That's a really popular brand. And we have in Lillooet confirmed 15 of the, now they're saying 16, maybe 17 species of bats possible. And this is a very handsome bat. This is the spotted bat. And I've been out netting, and these bats fly really high and they take moths. But so there we are. And there'll be some information about where it lives and what we know about it in Lillooet and kind of what it needs to thrive and survive, and the conservation concern. Most of the bats are listed because of conservation concerns, and so it will tell you a bit about what we know, and there's not a lot known about these guys, where it lives and where you could get more information. And the naturalists help with providing some of the references to try and make sure that everything we've got on here is very accurate. And yeah, so it took about 3 years for the brewery to actually get built. And maybe switch over, Natalie, and we'll show a couple of pictures of the brewery, unless somebody's really interested in one of those species. But here's a couple of I'll pass things around. It talks a bit about the brewery. So we've got the winery, Fort Barons, that everyone knows about, and then we've got Cliff and Gorge out at Texas Creek. So those are kind of two destinations for people. And now right at the very end of Main Street is this brewery. And I sent Natalie a couple of pictures to show you. There's the brewery. And it's looking over the old bridge and the Fraser River and down the canyon. It's quite magnificent. It's really simple. And some of those pictures all of the pictures are of the creatures. I forgot to show you some of the pictures that we got. And maybe look at the next picture. There's a spotted bat. So that's what's on the can. There's a Townsend's big-eared bat and a spotted bat, and he's got some little wooden plaques with these caricatures on them, and they're selling like crazy. And there's also a QR code, so on your can of beer you can learn about mountain goats or whatever the species is. And so that's the Naturalist Society's interest, is just trying to promote the education and the habitat. So we also gathered there on Remembrance Day. It's a great spot to have meetings or just meet with friends. Kids are welcome in there. There's non-alcoholic drink. It doesn't feel quite like a bar so much. It's just a nice meeting place. And that's the Statlian flag on the left. And some of the creatures featured and their growlers in the back. And of course, I'm holding up a bat checklist, which they go through fairly quickly. So people are picking them up. So there we go. And the next picture. That's Randy Moody, who runs the White Bark Pine work. He's kind of the Canadian chapter of the White Bark Pine project, and the naturalists have been working with him since early 2000, doing a lot of good restoration work in the area. And it's good to have white bark pine and Clark's Nutcracker featured as part of the brewery and the beer. And I think there's one more picture. No, that's it. That's the end of my presentation. We got our money back from NDIC.
Did
Yes.
you bring any beer?
Yes.
But I did bring a picture that Ian helped me develop, which is for the SLRD office, which is not of a badge. But it was such a good picture of the whole board that I got him to print it for me and I framed it and I brought it along.
We are gorgeous.
I know. I think everybody looks pretty good in that picture. So, thank you very much. Tony is showing one of the beer. I believe he's got the Western Screech Owl there. Thank you.
Bit early, Tony.
Well, when you're on Zoom.
Let's see the bottom.
It's unopened.
So yeah, we're pretty pleased. It was a nice partnership. It worked really well for the brewery and it worked really well for the natural event. So you should definitely come up and check that out when you come through. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I can't see the picture.
We'll send it along.
Yeah, great job.
It'll be here somewhere.
That's really good.
Yeah. The picture?
No,
Yeah.
the whole process.
Yeah, I'm quite pleased with that. I mean, of course, there was a couple of hiccups along the way, especially with
Yeah.
COVID, and look how long it took for the brewery to develop. Yes. But it's a real improvement to Main Street, Lillooet, for sure.
Can you just show the picture to the camera?
Not quite sure how I do.
Christmas might be the only practical way to do that. To show the
Like
screen to show to.
it's not a bat, though. It's
Well, the picture of
the
my
picture was the.
in the newsletter.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. Usually Ian does pictures of birds and animals.
Amazing stuff.
Well,
In fact, that's what he's doing today is the temperature bird count. Yeah.
Thank you, Director Birch Jones. That's
In area eight.
and you kept perfectly to your time. So
Thank
thank you. Let's move along to our delegation. We have BC Hydro joining us. Zooming in. Okay. Good morning, Dean and Mr. Shepherd. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We are looking forward to your presentation. We'll just start off by saying that we've got 10 minutes for your presentation and about 5 minutes for questions. So if you'd like to, if you could please try and stay within that, we would appreciate it. And I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Lovely to hear about the brewery. I got to go there this fall and it was absolutely fantastic. So I definitely recommend to anyone. So my name is Whitney Dean. I'm with Community Relations with BC Hydro, and Jim Shepherd joins me. He's the manager of capital projects for BC Hydro. And so today we'll just go through the first slide. So we are presenting to you our Bridge River capital projects, our investment update as we near the end of the year. So we'll go to the next slide for the agenda. And with the agenda, we'll go through the Bridge River system overview. I know many of you are familiar with it. Then we'll go through the capital plan update on our major projects. We'll go through safety, our workforce, our forecasts for the year and what happened for this year, our accommodation as well. So what we're forecasting, and then our communications and engagement. So at this point, I'll hand over the presentation to Jim Shepherd.
Thank you very much. I'm assuming everybody can hear me. So if I can go to the slide 3, please, the next slide. Okay, this just a quick look at the Bridge River system. And the one things I sort of want to point out is we sort of have the three major projects we sort of have coming up are over at the LaJoy Dam, that's in the top left, the Bridge River powerhouses, that's kind of in the bottom middle, and then the Seton powerhouse, that's sort of on the bottom right. So next slide, please. Okay, so just so you know that this is for the Bridge 1 facility. The CPCN was granted actually by the BC Utilities Commission in October of this year. So we're actually sent out the RFP and everything is scheduled to close in early 2023. Targeted completion of this project is 2030 with work on the first generator sort of tentatively starting in 2027. The penstock's going to be recoded. That's the inside. It's going to be recoded at the same time as the generator. So the timeline's about the same. Right now, we're actually doing some work on the penstock foundations. We'll talk about that in a bit. We're taking away some of the debris around the foundations. We're doing some shotcrete work next year, and then the actual penstock refurbishment foundations in 2024. So next slide, please. This is actually our good news story. We've actually completed all the main work at Bridge 2 as of November 2022. When we installed a new T7 transformer and recommissioned a generator, and the penstock interior recoat was finished in June. Next slide, please. Okay, for Seton, we're looking at a unit replacement to be completed in 2028 and a possible hydraulic bypass to be completed in 2027. As you can see, we did some work this year. We're doing some drilling and coring. We're trying to get a better idea of the rock around the current power canal. There are a couple of smaller projects with dam safety. One of them, the surge spill mitigation hazard project, was finished this year. It's a fairly small project on the top of Mission Mountain. And we're also doing some drainage improvements for School Creek and Town Creek. Next slide, please. We've got quite a few slides on LaJoy. So we're actually looking at the LaJoy Dam to reduce the seismic vulnerabilities and address issues with the dam face. This project is actually going to be the largest that we're going to see in the system. And we're going to be submitting an application to the BC Utilities Commission in 2026. Upon approval of that, construction will probably start in about 2027 and continue to 2023. Next slide, please. So the leading alternative right now for the LaJoy Dam is to improve the dam to a full reservoir level. So that gives us the back right up to the 749.8 meters. We've got a picture here of the dam face that was taken of April this year, and we lowered the reservoir to do some exploratory work, and get into that in a little bit. Next slide, please. So some of the next steps we're planning on doing this project are outlined on this slide. We have a lot of planning and engineering to do, or engineering work to do, sorry, and this will allow us to meet our our 2026, application date to the BC Utilities Commission. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so here's an overview of what we did to the dam face in April. We lowered the water level for 3 weeks in April. This is pre-freshet, approximately 10 meters to do this work. This allowed us to investigate the upstream face of the dam and the toe of the dam, sorry. Drawdowns during this construction are expected to last a lot longer, by the way. This drawdown actually helped us do some of the information we're going to need for the design, where the team is looking at options that could minimize the number and duration of drawdowns during construction. There's a better understanding of priorities also when it comes to environmental monitor, where and how we can get access, and managing flows in the reservoir operates at lower levels. There's actually a summary you can read with the project manager's thoughts in this fall's Bridge River newsletter, and Whitney will talk about that at the end of our presentation. Next slide, please. We actually are continuing to work on the replacing transformer of Bridge 2 after the successful installation of Bridge 7 this fall. So we've got another one that's happening next year, or sorry, the year after next. We're also upgrading and repairing the transmission line that goes from the Bridge River terminal over to Kelly Lake. We filed the CTCN of this in July of last year, and the targeted completion of this project is in the fall of 2026. I don't know if you know that one. That's the one that sort of goes from the Bridge River terminal over to the other side across the lake, and then it follows along the Seton Lake itself, goes through Merritt, and then continues up the Fraser River. So next slide, please. Just one note on this one. We did actually have a lost time injury in a recent construction season. A worker was hit by an excavator bucket and broke his leg. Actually, we've been doing really well for this, and actually, this is one of the first lost time accidents I think that I've actually had to present to this session. Next slide, please. Okay, we had between 40 and 50 people working at Bridge River this summer, and we're looking at 60 next year, with about 30 working in Seton Portage and the remainder working in Lillooet. Next slide, please. So accommodations, we're looking at a small number of workers in Seton Portage and Lillooet in 2023, and approximately 120 workers in 2024. Of that, most of the work is going to be happening over Bridge, but we will be doing some work, some site preparation over at Seton, and we'll be doing some work probably on the Bridge River transmission project. So we may be seeing some of the workers in Lillooet, but we haven't finalized the exact split yet. So I'm going to pass you back over to Whitney in the next slide.
So this is for our access and accommodation study that some of you have started to hear about. So we have been spending a lot of this time this year planning and with our consultants. So we're still in the early stages of planning out the study, the contractors finishing the design phase. Then towards the end of this year, so we're getting close, we'll be reaching out to stakeholders that will be involved. We'll be preparing people for meetings. So what we've identified is 3 different touch points over the year to go through the consultants during this study with stakeholders to get a take on we're looking at accommodation, we're looking at roads, and then we're also looking at socioeconomic impacts as well. So several meetings throughout the year, and then towards 2024 is when we will have the findings of that study. So this I know is really important as we get to know how we mitigate impacts and how we can work together with communities in line with community goals when we have these projects coming through. And so next slide. And then for communications, so a Bridge River newsletter most likely coming out in January, the next version, but then we'll also be communicating. We'll be doing open houses and local ads. We'll have site tours when applicable. And then we have the newsletter, project one-pagers, and then of course delegations like this to local governments. We also have our Bridge River projects website that's up there. And then we have projects at bchydro.com that you can email, but also you can feel free to email me as well with any of your questions. And with that, we'll go to the next slide, which I believe is questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead, Director Demare.
I've got a difficult one for you, Jim. That's the Hazelwood contractor that was on Road 40 when he was coming into the BC Hydro. Just curious on why that wasn't listed as an incident.
If I remember correctly, actually, maybe we'll get back to that question. I'm going to go by my memory, and I don't want to make a mistake on it.
Yeah.
But I think it had to do with the fact that he wasn't physically working on a BC Hydro facility or doing work for BC Hydro at the time when the incident happened. But I'll get Whitney to get back to you on the exact details on that.
Okay, thank
Because
you.
I don't want to make a mistake and tell you the wrong thing.
Yeah, the reason I ask, with WorkSafe BC, there should have been some recommendations come out of it, and that should be public.
Absolutely. Again, I'll work with Whitney to get a more fulsome response back to you on that.
And thank you for the presentation. It was really good.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Director Birchmans.
Thank you for these updates, and I really appreciate it when you invite me to the site tours and the local open houses, because that seems to be when I have the best communication about what's happening. I'm really interested in all of this. Are there any plans at this point to move that line from the one side of the Fraser over to the other in the Hacklick territory area? Because I hope not.
I'm not as familiar with that. Oh, go ahead, Jim. You probably know more.
It's been a while since I've had to work with that project team, but I do remember that there was some issues significant issues with moving the line from one side of the river from where it currently is to the other side. But I don't remember what the resolution of that is. And again, I'll work with Whitney to make sure that you have a better answer of exactly what's going on in that project.
I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
No
Thank you.
problem.
And go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And maybe this is a deeper question for a follow-up, but I'm just curious with your access and accommodation study, does that consider other approved and just proposed projects and how all these things might cumulatively affect things, or are you focused sort of just on your projects that you know about?
So we are, for the study, it is looking at our project needs. However, when we're talking with communities, that's a great time to then come to us with this is what's coming down the pipe when it comes to accommodations. So we're really looking to work with everyone through it. That's why there'll be 3 different touch points and working directly with the consultant. And so it'll be a year of studying it, which means then we can take into account other projects that are coming in and then also opportunities to partner as well. But if you have more specific questions or if I haven't answered it, send me questions or you can ask another follow-up.
Okay, I think we are, go ahead, Director Rainbow.
Not a question or a comment on this particular topic, but I just wanted to say hi to Whitney and thank you very much for keeping me informed with the hydro things in the Paradise Valley area. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tony. It's been nice to work with you so far.
Oh, it'll continue.
I thought that was nice. I heard it say something like.
All right, so with that, we will thank you both for being here today and wish you both a very warm holiday season. And we look forward to seeing you again in 2023 to hear about all the projects that are happening within our region. We're grateful. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, and happy holidays to all of you, and the best of all of 2023.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I think Whitney stays on. Did you
Oh,
like?
yeah, Pemberton, right?
Yes. That was my fault. We'll bring her back. Hopefully she'll stay. All right. Let's move along to 5.1 CEO verbal update.
Nothing, thanks, Chair.
We have so much to talk about in the budget that we can
That's right, get right to
fill
that.
that time, no problem. Awesome. Let's do that. Let's bring Suzanne. All right. Good morning, Director LaFrance.
Good morning.
We're not going to bring her in now. Okay, we'll turn it over to you. We're at budget 101 and we are open and ready.
All right.
We're done. Okay, thanks.
So I'll start by explaining some differences between municipal and regional district finances. And then I'll break for some questions. And then I'll start into our current budget process. And then I'll break for some questions too. So the main differences between regional districts and municipal budgeting and other financials, because it all kind of, the differences in the financial systems relay into the differences with financial planning. First off, every service that's provided by the regional district has to be accounted for separately and we use dedicated cost centers to do this. So each cost center identifies the cost of the service, the full cost to the regional district, and includes staff time, overhead, all the expenses applicable. The services are governed by establishing service area bylaws. So these bylaws define how the service will be funded with taxes, parcel taxes, user fees, etc., and the maximum tax requisitions that are allowable for that service. And those maximums can be either a flat dollar value or a tax rate per thousand of assessment for that service. And these maximum tax requisitions can be increased by 25% every 5 years without inspector of municipality approval. And the SLRD is not a taxing authority, so we don't have access to the tax notices. Everything flows through Victoria, the surveyor of taxes in Victoria. So what we do is when the budgets are developed, I send my requested taxation amount to the surveyor of taxes for all of our services. They develop their own rural taxation notices using those amounts that I sent, as well as adding the provincial taxes for, you know, policing and school taxes into there. And so we don't collect taxes. I don't have the ability to look at tax notices, unfortunately. And in addition, due to the nature of the regional districts, we don't have a consistent mill rate or tax rate. Each service has its own tax rate, and rates are dependent on where you live in the regional district and what services that area contributes to. And also, unlike municipalities, our assessment property class multipliers are set by the province. So we don't have the ability to move these multipliers. So like, for example, residential and business, they have set multipliers set by the province, and I can't move those multipliers. And those are the main differences that I have for financials. And I'll just pause to see if there's any questions or clarifications on that.
Go ahead, Director Birchall.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Suzanne. And I just wondered, as you know, we're sort of hoping to get an increase in the rate for Lillooet Regional Invasive Species Society. And I heard you say every 5 years we have an opportunity to increase the requisition by
25%.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to follow that up. I think Veronica's already. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, and that's also not a perfect science too, because it depends on the establishing bylaw for that service. So for example, if that service had a tax rate per thousand maximum, and that assessment base for that service increased over 25% in 5 years, that basically is the increase, and there isn't anything allowed over top of that. So it's a combination of looking at the assessment changes as well as the flat dollar value. So the tax rate per thousand is a little tricky sometimes when the assessment changes drastically.
Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, we don't see tax, or we don't have any visibility into tax notifications. Do we have a sense of how, like, what percentage of taxes are being paid and remitted? And so is the province responsible for follow-up?
The province is responsible for collecting the taxes, and they have, for every rural tax amount that we submit, they charge a 5%. Is it a 5%? I think it's 5%, or it could be 8%. Sorry, I can't remember at the moment. A fee on top of that, and they keep this in a little coffer, and they use that in case taxes weren't submitted. So they have this additional kind of reserve that they can go into. And of course, if taxes aren't submitted over so many years, the land then reverts to the province. So we don't have tax sales either. It's all through the province.
Thank you. Director Pettengill, go ahead.
Yeah, so on our municipal tax bill, we collect for our municipal taxes, but the school board, and there's an SLRD line in there. Is that the province delegating the SLRD tax bill for people within the municipality? They delegate the collection to us, or is that a different amount of revenue, somehow separate from what you were talking about?
Yeah, that's different. So the municipalities, I also send what I require from the municipalities too for shared services. So for example, with Squamish, we have the pool, that's a shared service. And obviously the Squamish also participates in general government and all those regional services. So that's what that is. It's the Squamish's portion of those shared services.
Questions? Any questions on the screen? Okay, I'll turn it back to you to your next.
All right, so the current process starts off with gathering information. So currently the senior accountant has developed budget request spreadsheets, and she sends these off to the local service representatives in the summer for hopefully getting the 5-year plan from these societies back by October 31st. We often get them later, but we just try to give them some advance notice because they're usually volunteers and they're not working full time on these services. So these services include the small fire protection services, the search and rescue services, the libraries and the other little TV services and things like that that aren't managed by SLRD. They're managed by other not-for-profit societies. So that's the first step, and that typically starts in August or September. And then we receive all of these budgets from the local service areas and we review them. They have to be submitted with their most recent financial statements as well as their society forms. It's all based on the policy we have, policy 2.14 on local service representatives. And so we collate them, and then we also gather information internally. It starts with Celia, who's the asset management accountant. She reaches out to the department heads, mostly UES, Utilities, Environmental Services, and starts the conversation with them about their capital needs or any other kind of capital maintenance requirements. And she starts collating that information into spreadsheets with the department heads and the other, not always the department head, but sometimes it's, allocated to other people in the department. And so that's another step of just gathering information. And then we look at the Q3 for the current year. So for example, this year we're looking at the 2022 Q3. Usually we start in November, so we have a good third quarter financial information to go off of. And then we build the forecast for the full year for each service or each cost center. And this forecast allows us to kind of estimate the surplus deficit carry forward into 2023. So that's a kind of a key revenue or expense that we need each year as well to start building the financial plan for each service. So sometimes services go into deficits, and for various reasons. Usually it's emergency kind of maintenance or types of services that needed to be happening. And so sometimes there's a deficit carry forward that we have to deal with, and usually it's via taxation if there's no other source of fundings. And so when we build that forecast, it kind of starts the process of building the 2023 budgets. And that building of the 2023 budget is usually with the department heads or the person responsible. I build it into a spreadsheet and then I send it to them for review. And just to make sure we're not missing anything, we look at appropriate revenues, if there's grants available, if maybe some internal community works funds could be used, because there's only specific eligible expenses for those. And so it goes back and forth quite a bit until they're kind of developed fully. And then we start off with the committee meeting budgets first, because the deadlines for those meetings are first. For example, the EAD meeting in January will be the first budget presentation for the EAD services, and the EAD services, electoral area services, are just shared by the EADs. So for example, there's the civic addressing, there's building permits, building permitting services, and then there's the UBCM elections and emergency planning. So those would be the first budgets I would look at. And I'm halfway through them now. But like I said, this kind of process takes a lot of staff capacity to do, and we're kind of limited with our resources right now. But eventually the Deputy Director of Finance will be, more involved with the budgeting process in advance of the summer. So we'll start probably after the first quarter, just developing new projects that might be happening. But anyway, I'm kind of straying from my planned speech. But so we go from each deadline for each meeting is really what's driving each budget right now. And also the parcel tax budgets, parcel tax revenues have to be delivered to the province by February 28th, which is a really tight deadline. So I have to work on those first for that reason. And then, so as they go through the committee meetings and the regional board meetings, there's more changes required. So there's obviously presentations at those meetings and discussions and changes. And then I bring those back to the department heads involved, and we discuss what we can do, and they come back the following month. So from January and February, these budgets are brought forward. And then March obviously is the last month we have to discuss these budgets, and then they're finally adopted by March 31st. And so that's a legislated deadline. And then with these detailed budgets, we then build the financial plan bylaw, which is just the subtotals of each of those different groupings of revenues and expenses rolled up. And that's legislated requirement. So in essence, if a financial plan needed to be amended, it would just be off of the total of the bylaw as shown in the bylaw. So for example, if we went over on salaries for operating expenses, but overall the operating expenses did not go over budget, we would not have to do an amendment. So I'll just pause and just take some questions.
Thank you, Director. Just curious on, maybe you can explain the BC assessment role and how it plays into the budget.
Yeah, so the assessments are obviously created by BC Assessment per service. So we get a role, we get 3 roles a year. There's the completed role that is just being released at the beginning of January. And that gives us each separate services assessments. We use this to see what the maximum requisition can be for those services that use the tax rate per thousand. So that would be in the service establishing bylaw as the maximum amount of available. So if there's an issue with the maximum amount, we can then try to deal with it at that point. But the assessment changes again with the revised role. So the BC assessments give us the revised role, which is what is actually taxed on. So that final assessment at the revised role is what they base all of their taxes on for the property tax bills.
When does the revised role come out?
And the revised role comes out in the beginning of March. So it's also a very tight timeline to get the revised role into my budgets. And sometimes it's delayed. So BC Assessment sometimes has delayed releases because of internal issues with their software. And so then the final role isn't released until the next year. I believe it's kind of at the same time as the revised, it's the same time as the completed role. So the completed role 2023 would be released this January, as well as the 2022 final role. So there's those 3 roles that are spread out and kind of cause a little bit of timing issues for myself, especially because, I won't have that first completed role available for my January discussions. Just because of the timing of having the budgets on the agenda in time.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Director Gerber.
Thank you, and I appreciate this sort of just-in-time learning as I wade into the regional district finance for the first time. I'm curious around the service, like the cost centers. How many are we discussing? That's
You ready to guess first? You want to guess first?
My first guess was that it was a lot. I love relying on finance departments to turn that into an exact number. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because the regional board doesn't have in-depth discussions on all of the cost centers. So the regional board would mainly focus on the regional services, which is general government planning, solid waste management, and those types of services. But there are a total about 90 plus cost centers right now. And a lot of them are just single electoral area services. For example, Britannia Beach, all of their Britannia Beach community services would be mostly discussed with Tony, the Area D director, for example. But in the end, it does come through the board at the final adoption in March. So because it's just there's shared services and then there's just electoral area services. So the board doesn't have to get into the nitty-gritty of all the Britannia Beach services. That's how we currently are doing the reviews.
Yeah, I'm going to process that information. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mike, I had you. Okay, then Lauren.
Okay, definitely different than municipal. And I thought I was on the path, but I think I fell off the beaten path of so we collect the taxes and then we turn it over to the SLRD, or does that go to the province? And where does the 5 or 8% come back in?
So
like I need an algorithm here.
So, for example, the District of Lillooet, I do send the requisitions for the shared services to Lillooet, and they provide me direct funding in August for those services. The provincial side of things, so the provincial payments, they charge the percent fee on all of the taxes. So it's not the District of Lillooet that does that. So you don't have any extra payments or anything like that. It's just the rural taxes that the province collects, that they charge this 5.25% fee on every single tax amount that we ask for them to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then that comes back to the SLRD, the balance of that.
Yeah, and then the province pays us in August as well for those amounts.
Okay, thank you.
Director Pegniel.
Yeah, I gather that cost centers have to be quite segregated. In the shorter term, can we borrow from between cost centers to sort of manage fluctuations, or we can't, like, we would have to go out to short-term borrowing or something if we ran into trouble in a particular cost center?
Yeah, we're not allowed to move funding between services. So each service of the SLRD you have to treat as its own single standing service. And there is some ability to move funds if the service area are exactly the same, but it has to be a board resolution to say, you know, we realize, and it has to be for the same purpose. So for example, if there was a surplus reserve and you wanted to use it for another service for a capital purpose, you know, that probably wouldn't work. So it would have to stay for the same purpose and it'd have to be the same service area.
Any other questions? There's a lot of questions. Okay, I'll go ahead, Director Rainbow.
So just to follow up on that last point, Suzanne, if, for example, we had a problem with wastewater treatment in Furry Creek, we couldn't borrow money from Britannia Beach wastewater treatment. Am I correct there?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
And we tax all residents in the regional district and in municipalities for general government and planning, but only the people within a cost center are taxed for that service. So for wastewater in Britannia, that is a tax that is focused just in Britannia. And then general government is one that is shared amongst all of the residents of the electoral areas and the municipalities, correct?
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Does every cost center have a reserve? And if not, what do we do if there's like money left over at the end? Can it just stay in that account or does it have to go somewhere else?
Yeah, so we strive to have reserves for every service, every cost center. Some have struggles because of the small area. So, you know, it's hard to tax 25 residents for a large amount of money. So we try to chip away and develop these reserves as we can for some services. It's easier than others. And what was that last part of the question? I'm sorry.
So if there's money left over in a service, in a cost center at the end of the year, can it just stay in that cost center or does it have to get moved?
Yeah, no, it just remains. So it's just, I believe municipalities probably have reserves for the whole municipality. So it's similar to that, but it's each service has to have their own reserves.
That's why this is so complicated.
And it all stems around the service areas, right? The whole premise that that tax amount for a service has to remain with that service.
Did you have a question, Director Birch-Jones?
Yeah, just, well, more of a comment, Suzanne. In the past, you've provided at least the north with a shared service summary somewhere before March 31st, where we've been able to look at those services. And I found that really helpful. And I was just thinking that probably Mayor Hopeful would find it helpful in this first year as well for some of the specifics in that part of the world. And just thank you for that. And I really appreciate that you do an amazing job with a very complicated assignment. Thank you.
Director DeMare.
Yeah, I got one question, and yes, we do a great job with electoral area directors and all the feedback and back and forth. And, you know, especially like last year, you know, there were a couple of tax services that I had to give some funding to for overages and so on and so forth. So it's an excellent way of doing it. Can you just go over how to increase the tax service? Like the last one that was done was the Gun Lake Fire Protection Society.
Yeah, so it depends on the service establishing bylaw, of course, how that was initially adopted. So I'll give you the more general aspect of increasing increasing the maximum requisition you wanted to know about.
Yep.
Yeah, so generally we review it every year in January. We take that completed roll that the BC assessments give us and we plug it into a spreadsheet we already have, and we can see if there's any movement available based on that 5 years 25% increase rule. And if there isn't anything available, sometimes we have to bring it to the constituent via an alternative approval process to have that service increased. And that's a longer process where we have to, you know, advertise, we have to build a whole bunch of documents for that process, and obviously it goes to the board as well for review. And the process can sometimes take 3 to 6 months to get completed for and then it has to be approved by the inspector of municipalities as well.
Yeah, thank you. And there's a percent of that resident base or the property owner base. And if just go through that process of how many, what percent. If there's so many that don't agree with it, that write letters in, just go through that process.
Oh, I'm not prepared to do that. No, that's not part of the budget 101. I'm sorry, but there is, we can do that maybe another time. We can bring that up as maybe the alternative approval process 101.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Thank you for all this. Something you said there, tweak something, question. So we can, as part of this process, increase the maximum requisition by up to 25% every 5 years. Is that 25% of the mill rate? I'm not sure if that's the right term, or 25% of the dollars collected.
It's the maximum requisition amount within the service establishment bylaws that can be increased. So it's not the tax amount, it's the amount of tax available in that bylaw. So you could increase it and not tax for it, just have it available for future use. So that's the mechanism to increase the maximum is the 5-year 25% increase. And it's just because the inspector of municipalities doesn't want to go over each little increase for all of these services. So they created this rule to allow us to just increase it naturally. We still send the bylaws off to the ministry, but they don't have to approve them.
And just to be clear though, that increase, is it an increase in a dollar amount, or it's an increase in a like a percent mill rate, or like a rate?
Yeah, it's either. So depends on the service establishment bylaw and how it was created. If it was created with both, it's usually the greater of would be the maximum. So it's the greater of the dollar value or the tax rate per thousand for the assessment service area. Most of our services now have the both because it allows more flexibility.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So along that line, if we've got 90 cost centers, I'm going to assume, I hope I'm correct in assuming they're not on the same 5-year cycle. So there'll be a percentage of that every year. How is that handled as far as assessing whether this is the time to request an adjustment in each center? That seems like a big piece of work in its own right.
It is, yeah. So every January we have a spreadsheet ready and we plunk in the new assessments. So we have the assessments continuing on for each service and each tab. And so we just plunk in the new one. We see the change over 5 years, and there's a calculation that's spit out. And if there is available increase, I bring it to the board or the EAD, depending on what service it is. And then it's decided on, yeah, we want to increase this, and I bring the bylaw, then I bring the bylaws for approval.
And then does that process run in tandem with budget timelines?
Yeah. So the budget, the bylaws that amend the service areas for that increased maximum requisition have to be approved before the financial plan is adopted. So usually it's just at that same meeting just before. So in March, yeah. I do it in January because some of the shared services have to go to the municipalities for approval. So they have to give them time to bring it to their council and approve the bylaw.
But not every service has to be increased every 5 years, right? Natural
No.
growth allows for a lot of them to just carry on.
Yeah, but a
Yeah.
choice, a decision to do something, including nothing, is needed in there. So
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Suzanne, I wonder if could I just tell the board about the emergency services bylaw we had, just to sort of illustrate the complexity of these things. Area D had a bylaw which raised money for emergency services and paid it directly to Squamish. And this was before SLRD had its own emergency manager and so on. So when we established our own service, that bylaw became dormant. It just sat there. We didn't tax people at all. Then we wanted to provide some money to search and rescue. So we had to go to the inspector and get approval to change the purpose for that bylaw from general emergency services to support search and rescue. That was done. And then Kristen called me one day and said, we have a problem because we're taxing all of Area D, but Squamish Search and Rescue only goes as far north as Daisy Lake. So that means that Pinecrest and Black Tusk were paying into that bylaw, into that cost center, but not receiving any service. So their solution to that was to siphon some money off and pay it to the Whistler Search and Rescue, which covers Pinecrest and Black Tusk. So, I mean, that's just kind of an illustration for me of how complex regional district financing is. Thank you.
Thank you. You're interacting with these pieces so much. It's good help. Go ahead.
That's an interesting story. You told me that story, but now I'm grasping it much better. Are there these service areas? I understand they're drawn differently than the areas that are, so do many of them cover multiple areas? I understand that some will cover the entirety, but then there'll be overlap between area A and B or so on. So, wow, okay.
Yeah, there's many different,
I'll get there. Okay.
I have to create many different meetings. So for example, there's a lot of area A, B, and Lillooet shared services. So I have to create a meeting to discuss those budgets with those people. And I include the CAO from Lillooet as well. And for example, there's a lot of shared services with Pemberton. So I have to create meetings for those as well.
So if I could just, so then for a resident in all these different areas, must be quite challenging to sort of calculate the overall increase that they may be facing. And how is that consideration rolled into all the decisions in all these cost centers to sort of understand that overall and how reasonable or not the proposed increase is?
Yeah, it's really tricky to relay out increases because it's developed by service. So each service has a different story. Some people might have a 0% increase and some people might have a huge increase depending on what services they have. So I struggle with that often. And I think that in the future, might as well segue into my future budgeting vision. And I hope to start earlier, and I hope to use the Unit 4 system, which has a financial planning software that we have purchased. I just haven't been able to use it because it's very time consuming to set up. So now with the deputy director, I'll have him setting up these financial plans within Unit 4. And they offer you more what if and scenario budgeting. So you can have multiple different budgets for the same service and kind of present them that way versus having to build all these spreadsheets. So that's my future plan. And also I want to use Bang the Table more. So have more community sections within Bang the Table because, there are similarities, like Britannia Beach community has similar taxes, obviously, and then the Furry Creek community. So have more community-based information that would help with the tax rate increases. Or decreases as they might be. Just explaining them.
Yeah.
Then so I am a person who lives in Pinecrest, has a number of cost centers that build their total recreation. Does their tax bill show all of those individual services, or is it in a single requisition amount?
It depends. So we can so most of the shared services show up as one line item under their area. So it'll say, for example, area D services. But then if it's specific to their area, so for example, for your Pinecrest example, a Pinecrest Area D line item on their property tax would include general government, all of the full area expenses. And then they'll see separate line items for their Pinecrest water and Pinecrest sewer underneath that. And that's generally how they're shown on their property taxes. There is a mechanism within the province's online software where I submit my requisition requests to flag them as separate lines. So I can change that and flag them as separate lines if I wanted to show each separate service on the property tax, but that might be a little bit too much information. So generally all of the area expenses are in one line, and then each community expense is separated.
Yeah, because my tax bill, the SLRD requisition is just a single line. So it's interesting, you know, whether you live on one side of the border in Whistler or on the other side in Pinecrest, your tax bill for the SLRD is either one line or more than one line.
So that triggers a question of that, to use this Pinecrest example, if a community member would like further clarity than what's provided on their bill, how is that something that is easily accommodated?
It's difficult for sure because we don't have access to their bills. So I normally send them to the surveyor of taxes to discuss it, or they can sometimes send me a copy and then I can walk them through it that way. But because I don't have access, it does cause a little bit of issues.
Right, so it's not a report to run or a package to put together to, no. Interesting, okay.
Yeah, the one thing that Suzanne does, they give a little pamphlet.
Yeah.
And in it, it explains all the different tax services, what they're paying for. And also some highlights of what's coming up, what some of the major projects are for that year. And electoral area directors have, you know, that's our choice, what we want to have on there.
Okay.
Yeah. But just on the whole conversation that you had there is, I had the situation last year where Braylon Fire, because we get to review their budgets, right? And they wanted a big tax increase because they wanted to buy a fire truck. And so I had a Zoom meeting with them and brought their budget up and showed them that they had a big reserve. They never knew they had the reserve. And all of a sudden it changed it and brought it right down again. So I think that whole communication of what that budget is, you know, I'm going to be doing more of that with various tax services because they don't actually get, very few of them ever go to the budget on the SLRD page, you know, the overall budget. And they need to know what they're paying for and so on and so forth. Everything's in there, all their income, expenses, and what they got in reserve, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And to address that, I think what I'm going to do is have the deputy director be the point person for all these local service representatives too, and be able to talk about their budgets that they've submitted earlier than I'm able to right now.
Yeah. With that in mind, that sort of each service or cost center having its own reserve and so on. And there was a mention of a dormant service or bylaw. Is there a risk, or just is part of this whole process ending up with sort of an orphaned reserve? If you understand what I mean, like, is there, so that's to use Tony's example from earlier, we're no longer collecting for that service, but when that decision was made, there's a reserve there. And earlier we said we can't move things around, and like, is that something that happens, or is my mind just going to a strange dark place of how this could play out.
Dark.
No, that totally, yeah, it has happened where, say, a service has ended even, and we've had to send back the funds and they're sent back at a negative requisition. So it's actually given back on their property taxes as a negative.
Well,
So
interesting.
the province handles that as well.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
So on that,
Sorry.
so this money,
No, it's fine. This is important.
we hold this in our account, or the province is holding it in account, and if there's interest, is that part of what gets sent back, or the interest we can transfer out, or?
So I think the example was our own reserve funds. So say we had collected taxation funds, the service ended, we had some funds left in a reserve, we would send them back through the province as a negative requisition. The province has a reserve fund that they keep via our via that service charge they charge on each taxation, and they use that for issues where they have to refund somebody. Say somebody was charged incorrectly, they can refund them that way, or they use it for taxes that they're unable to receive or unable to collect. But that's separate. That's the province's fund.
Okay, but we hold our reserve in our bank account. Presumably, we're getting some sort of interest. We shut down the reserve or this cost center. There's some money left in our bank account. The money and any interest and everything goes back through a negative requisition. We don't get to keep the interest or anything like that. Thank you.
That's right.
Right. Okay. More to come.
That's good. I got it. So, yeah.
All right. Suzanne, did you have anything else that?
I'll just briefly mention one other difference is public consultation for regional districts is also very different from municipal. Whereas municipal might have more public hearings and more direct community hearings, meetings, we don't have the capacity to do that. So the legislation requires just 2 weeks of notice for the public to review the financial plan, the draft financial plan. And it's really not specific to any kind of other requirements, but we try to do more and more every year. Now that we have more capacity coming next year, this year we're not able to do any more. We're going to use bang the table, like I mentioned, but that's another difference. It's a lot more tricky to have community meetings in a regional districts where it's all over a large area versus the municipalities. And that was the last point I wanted to make. And I guess if there's any final questions.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point though for community members who, I mean, we're all interacting with this and it's difficult for us to understand it. And so to put that out into the community where it does affect someone's tax bill, but if it's a difficult thing for us to explain, it's definitely difficult to understand. So if we can work with this over the next year, I think with new staff capacity, to do more outreach, maybe it's targeted outreach into communities where, and I know that you do that when a new service is being established, but when it's, an existing long-term cost center or that sort of thing, for us to be able to explain it in communities, I think that would be really great. There's no end to the need for public engagement on these things, but our desire to interact with that is, I think, really high, and I think that's a good place for us to work with our constituents. So, so thank you for making those comments. Is there any final questions from anyone on or comments on this process? Now's your chance.
Yeah, I just one comment about communication with the public. I happened to have a conversation about 3 days ago with a Furry Creek resident who was complaining to me that half of his taxes go to support Britannia Beach, which is just not true. But it just highlighted for me that I haven't done a very good job with explaining to local residents just what's going on with their taxes, and that's something I will have to pay attention to this coming year. But so if we're finding it a little difficult to cope with, then you can believe that residents do as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Suzanne, I'd just like to thank you very much for going through it like that. That was very, very clear and appreciated. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead.
That's an interesting point, because a portion of the Furry Creek taxpayers' money does go to support general government and all of those sort of shared things, which they get the benefit of, but then they perceive as serving people outside of their jurisdiction, which is certainly the sentiment of people who pay taxes in municipalities. Like why am I paying for stuff that doesn't happen in my community? So that person in Britannia is technically funding the operations of this organization, which does serve people in Furry Creek. But yeah, they're not paying for like waste management or water or whatever services that are local area services. You're right, it's confusing. Like it's not something that's really straightforward for people to understand.
On that, the tax rate for municipal property owners for general government services, is it the same as electoral area?
It's based on the assessments. So
Okay, so that rate is the same.
yeah, the rate,
$10 million house in Whistler compared to a $200 house in
$200 house.
Quite a bit more.
Yeah.
The best.
Thank you.
We are learning.
Wow.
200.
We won't get into the pill conversation, but
$200.
No, but I think that's a really good point
Yeah.
that you bring up.
Yeah.
Is when I look at my home value and I look at what I pay and I look at what my neighbor pays just down the road, it would be really helpful for people to understand, and something we try to do at the municipal level is your percentage is based on the average of your assessed growth as compared with your neighbor's assessed growth. And if it's significantly more than the average, then you pay more. And if it's flat, then you pay the same. And if it's less, then so in affordable housing, your property taxes actually go down every year, which is a fascinating thing to be on the receiving end of, when your taxes go down every year relative to the whole pot. But I think it's really coming up with a way to communicate this in a way that's tangible for someone so that they can understand that you're talking 35 cents for this service or $35 for this service, to show taxpayers that what they get in service from local governments is extraordinary value compared with if they had to build their own water treatment and everything on their own property, right? Like if you had to do if you wanted to truly live off the grid and what it would cost you to do that, and the value for the services that we get from being a part of a regional district is exceptional value. But I think you need to remind people of that annually, to say, you couldn't do this on your own. And you might not always use the roads in Goldbridge, but it benefits everyone to have that shared service.
Yeah, just trying to wrap my head around, like at a municipal budget engagement, I can talk to anyone in the room and they all have the same mill rate, and their assessed values may be different, but it's all the same mill rate. But I have a regional public engagement, like one person might have 13 cost centers apply, and another one has 20, and it's like a, you know, I don't even know what their circumstances. So how do you have that conversation?
Yeah.
Let's just not talk.
Just to follow up on Chris's point there, you know, again, if you just look at Area D, I've got some services which everybody in Area D pays into, some which are just specific to one community, like Britannia or Furry Creek, some which are 2 or 3 of those communities. So the Upper Squamish, Britannia Beach and Furry Creek, who might contribute to something that goes into Squamish. And it would be almost impossible to, well, you couldn't do it with one meeting. You'd have to have a series of meetings so that just like people were in that meeting with you. And it's complex, very complex.
Yeah. Just on that, with that little pamphlet, there is the shared services.
Yeah.
And then they're listed. So when you get that pamphlet in electoral area,
Yeah.
everything's listed. What the individual ones are, say like Gun Lake Fire is just for Gun Lake. So they pay into it. So it's that service area. And then there's the shared ones, and then there's the hospital and all the rest of the RCMP. So they get a full document about where their funds are going.
Go ahead, Armin.
I'm trying to visualize this, and is this something that could or does tie into like a GIS, so you could see where the cost center areas are, so you could layer that in, like, or is that been considered as part of like a future communications? I understand that could be a major thing to do, but I'm just trying to sort of visualize where these service areas are, and some areas will be more layered. And I fall in this area that has 8-10 layers, and then
Yeah, it's possible. I know we were trying to map all of our service areas. I'm not sure if we have them all mapped, but there's certainly a considerable amount mapped, and it's available on our website. But that's a good point to say, you know, maybe we could use GIS more effectively to pinpoint what services each, you know, the full list of services for one lot. You could just pull it out. That would be amazing.
I understand that could be a decade-long project, but
Yeah.
just trying to visualize what's happening.
Yeah.
And just on that, I think one of the UBCM, I think it was maybe Silva, the Ashcroft got an award for their GIS. You could go on their site and click on a property, and it had what they paid for, water taxes and sewer and so on and so forth. Everything was part of their asset management too. They had all their fire hydrants were, and you click on it, and it was a really good little program they used. So, you know, that's for that, our online map. You know, I've asked in the past to have all the accredited bed and breakfast,
right,
so that you can have layers, bed and breakfast in England. There they are, right?
Yeah. No, I find the GIS we use in the municipality to be just an invaluable tool. Business license, you run all these different layers. It sounds like it could be a solution to add clarity, but then it may not by the time you actually add all those layers. How to interpret what that is, but this I was trying to.
I like the little brochure with the tiny print.
I hope this is my last question, but every time I think that somebody else asks another question, which prompts me to ask another question. How do you decide when it's appropriate to set up a new local area service. Because there are things that could be local area services that sit in planning or in general government, I assume. And that at some point, there's a decision made to set up a local area service and move away from holding that in general government or planning.
I'm trying to think of a scenario where we've had a service kind of develop from another service. I guess the select services potentially is an example. It's like a general government service that we've separated as EAD designated grant function. But mostly the services are petitioned for. So there's a community need for a service and we get petitioned for it.
So would it be a board decision then? Could the board decide that that there's a function that they felt was more appropriate as a local area service and bring that to the table, or does it have to be initiated by residents?
It could be initiated by the board as well, yeah. It would have to still go through the same kind of process to build this bylaw, so it would have to go through usually AAP process.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Suzanne, we have one at the moment with the District of Squamish and Area D agricultural plan, which we've been funding with grants, and at some point we want to move that forward and have a service to support that. So that is really coming from, it's sort of a developmental process, if you like, that's involved the communities, involved staff of both the SLRD and the District of Squamish, plus elected officials, and we'll get to the point eventually where we will have a service to support that. Another one might be, we could look at the library in Squamish, which has been receiving some money through grants from Area D, but in the long term will be better served by a cost center which taxed people that were using the library in Squamish. And so that really is coming from the library and the library board, myself, and I guess from the Squamish Council as well. So rather than, it's not really coming from the community, but it will be presented to the community. And at some point that we will have to go through that alternative approval process to get it approved. So I think there's numerous ways that the need for a cost center can be identified, and the process for each one. Again, it's complicated because the needs are different, and the interests vary as well, from just a very local small part of an electoral area to the larger area and the neighboring municipalities. So it's very complex.
Director Hopple.
Thank you. So right at the beginning, after the election, all the councillors, including myself, wrote out our list of all the services that Lillooet provided as a municipality. And it was quite surprising. There was some I missed in there. There was lots they missed in there. There was, but I think that educating the public on what services that we actually do provide is better going into tax season, and including the SLRD, because it is only one line on ours too. And people don't know that it includes the library or search and rescue or on and on. And again, I think that education is important because taxpayers only see the cumulative effect. They only see what they're paying this year compared to last year, and with rising costs and everything, I think it's very difficult. But if we educate between the SLRD and our own municipalities, I think people are better apt to be okay with a moderate tax increase.
Yeah, I agree. It's difficult. in terms of the municipal tax notices as well, because like you said, it just shows up as one line and they don't really know what they're paying for. Yeah.
Thousands, what I was trying to go to the, just put, chip away at them. With the so many cost centers, and we talked about establishing a new one, and we talked about sort of winding one down and those overage funds. Is there ever situations where they're sort of merged, so rather than running two, these start to sort of overlap, and now this can maybe become one and sort of put one of those to bed in an effort to streamline? Is that something that ever happens, or something that we sort of look for to sort of push these back to a reasonable, limit these to a reasonable number?
We've sort of done this with a few services. So different communities paying into one service. So for example, the Divine, not the Divine, the, oh boy. So there's transfer station that a whole bunch of different communities pay into. So we have different bylaws for the different communities, but then they go into one service for that transfer station. So there is that as well. We haven't amalgamated the bylaws, so we still have the separate bylaws, but we show it as one kind of service, like the funding goes into the one service for both bylaws. But we haven't really amalgamated, but I'm sure it's possible. You'd have to go through the same process that was involved in creating those bylaws though. So whether it was an AAP, and I say the same process because not all services have to go through an AAP process. Depends on the service. It also, not all services have to have a maximum requisition. It depends on the service.
Okay.
No, I'm done. I gave up the part after my last.
And that's all through legislation, those different rules.
Okay. I think we will have more questions. Write them down. You're always welcome to send them on to the CAO so that we can continue this conversation in January. But thank you very much for your presentation. It's super complicated work. I'm sure.
Thank you.
And we appreciate that you do it.
It is very time consuming, that's for sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that,
Motion to receive.
motion to receive. That doesn't feel big enough.
A round of applause.
Thank you. Okay, so motion to receive by Director Herbert, seconded by Director Mayor. Comments? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Say thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Suzanne.
All right. Where was my next? Start selecting. Nothing for today.
Okay.
We will move along to receiving correspondence for information from BC Hydro regarding the Pemberton Substation rebuild project. Moved by Director Crompton, seconded by Director Richmond. Comments? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. I just want to note that we had Whitney Dean here. Oh, okay. If anyone has any questions. Does anyone have any questions? I don't want to waste her time by keeping her on video.
No,
Sorry,
good.
okay. With that, there's no late business for committee of the whole, so can I have someone with adjournment of this committee of the whole? Moved by Director Herbert, seconded by Director Birch-Jones. Anyone opposed? Motion carried. Let's reopen our public meeting. Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break. And we finished off, I think. So we're going on to 8.8, which is an information report regarding the COVID safe restart allocation. Are there any questions from anyone? Okay.
He's available.
You have questions? Hello, Director LaFrance. We have a question for you regarding 8.8, the COVID safe restart allocations. Go ahead.
Thank you through the chair. Just one quick question around, appreciate the need to carry forward, but do we have any risk in terms of how long we can carry forward this money for from the province? Have we had any indication about when we need to send it out?
Yeah, there is. I feel like there might be some risk. However, I haven't been able to reach anybody at the province with any good information. So the person that sent out the original COVID-19 restart grant information was not, I think she was left her employment. She wasn't available. She didn't answer calls. So I sent a couple emails to different people within the province, and basically they just relayed me to the website, and the website it hasn't been updated for about a year, and there's no indication of when this funding might be, stopped. Most municipalities are assuming that it's just continuing. So I would request, keeping these COVID allocations as is for now. I'm going to look for more information. I'm going to try to figure out if 2023 is still available for funding these projects. But yeah, there is a little bit of a lack of information out there about when the deadline is for finally funding everything.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions? Right. Would anyone like to move receipt of the report? Moved by Director Birchstone, seconded by Director Herford. Comments? Is there anyone opposed? Motion carries. Okay, let's move along to 9.1, which is the board roundtable. And just to give a little bit of context, I would like everyone to consider your report back from your area in light of something that fits within our strategic environment. So how does your report back serve this board or our region, rather than just no direction at all? Because it's always just been talk about anything you want. And I just thought it might be helpful if we point towards one thing that is happening in our area, but serves the region. Curveball. So we'll start over at the end with Area B on the spot.
Well, I'm going off right away because I was sitting here thinking, I forgot to say in my Area B presentation, my favorite line, when I asked the board of directors of the Naturalists if they'd like to support the brewery in this promotion of education and the website and the photos and all the rest of it, one director said, well, I like wildlife and I like beer, so I think we should do that. And everyone voted for it. That's my report.
All right, let's carry on around the table this way. Director Hopful, tell us about something in Lillooet that is a regional interest.
Well, okay. Skip the first one.
Tell us whatever you're prepared for.
Last week, okay, I attended the Lillooet Indigenous Court Steering Committee, in which they are presenting a business plan. I think they were going to present it to the province, to the Provincial Advisory Committee, for the creation of an Indigenous court within Lillooet. So I think that's it's a solid, well laid out plan, and I'm hoping it comes to fruition. And I think like I said, they were doing it on Monday, and so I'll be able to report next time. That's within the plan. And I know it's on the agenda. We'll be applying for the Economic Diversification and Infrastructure Grant. That's coming up here. And I just wanted to say that it's very important to us because we've been spending the last, 8 years trying to get Lillooet back up and into a place where we don't have any debt and we've let our infrastructure go. So we really need this grant. And I look around and I was, last time I was in Pemberton and I'm walking down the street and I went to that potato place. And but outside I can hear these chimes going. I don't know if it was from a church or what. It was very Christmassy. There was lights and it was just really beautiful. And I think Lillooet has lost its sparkle, and I think we need to put that back in. So it's going to be on the agenda here coming up in a few minutes. So, and that's it. Thanks.
Okay, there's one, and it is the Railroad Pioneer Mines Office renovation project. They're doing fairly good. They've got foundation repairs done, drainage issues dealt with. They've got a new entrance, got rid of those staircases that were not original, and there's going to be a ramp up to the main entrance. They've got the new accessibility entrance ramp on the side of the building built and accessible bathroom with the 40,000 that they got for their accessibility funding. And they got two major items still to be done. There's lots of work yet, but the main ones are 2 heat pump systems for heating that building, because it actually used to get heated from the Braylord Hall oil burner, and complete fire sprinkler system because it's a public building. And they've had a few delays due to workforce issues, unfortunately, like everywhere else, especially in rural areas, trying to get qualified people to do the work. So,
to tie regionally, maybe I'll just talk about housing. I was just chatting with Jenna saying that we've got a number of projects that are coming forward and some concepts and some ideas that are coming forward that hopefully put a dent in some of the housing issues that we have in Pemberton and hopefully help the corridor region a little bit as well. But as I was just saying, they're going to test Pemberton and the residents in terms of, I was just saying, we've been talking a lot over the last few years about densification and about how we're going to make some changes to, again, put a dent in the housing crisis. And now we're going to start to see it happen. And whether it's taller buildings or carriage houses or I think we're about to, see what action looks like over words, and it's going to be a really interesting community conversation. Fortunately, it ties in while we're doing our OCP review, so there'll be a direct connection there that we can really engage residents and talk about that vision and how and why. But it's going to be interesting times, and some of those projects are on the doorstep, and it's going to start those conversations. Good times ahead.
Awesome.
Into the region. I think I'll put all of my updates under the umbrella of it's getting really expensive to do things. So we just passed first 3 readings of our budget on Tuesday. And we're seeing an overall budget increase of 8.9%. Once we account for non-market change, that'll hopefully bring it down to 5.9, but 4% of that increase is being driven by inflationary growth pressures on some of our construction costs. A prime example of that is we just got an update from staff. We received some of the provincial money to build a childcare center in Squamish, just over $2 million, and costs have escalated by about 25% on that. So we're looking at almost a $500,000 overrun that we are going back to the province to see if there's more funding for. So that is a reality that's really hitting home for us, and I think it's probably very relevant across the region.
Okay, so our daycare project has gone through similar costs issues and what's that? Yeah, but the government, from our contacts, from what I'm hearing from staff is that the province is very aware of all of our cost overrun issues and they're putting another chunk of funding to support. But if there's any pushback, we should talk. I think when Karen and I went to the minister a couple of years ago to say, hey, we can't build for what your criteria says. I think it had an impact. So if you guys get any sort of pushback or similarly, let's
go to Director Rainbow.
Okay, two quick things. Our new tourist attraction for Sea Sky tourist attraction at Britannia Beach is getting to the exciting stage where you can see you can begin to see what it is going to look like when it's finished. And I'm talking about the new commercial village, which will be look like an all-star mining town, and there's no question it will be an attraction. The other thing that's happening at Britannia is that the young man that's building the coffee shop, burger stop, public washroom, truck stop. He's been beset with all kinds of delays, but is hoping to get that going by January the 1st. And that will have that'll be a very positive addition for travelers along the heading north on the Sea to Sky. But the thing that has the more regional impact, as you know, we have a new children's park at Britannia. And one of the women that was sort of leading the charge with that happens to be Rob Van Doorn's wife, Claudia, and she initiated contact with the Squamish Nation, and because she wanted they wanted to name the park and they wanted to have a First Nations name for it. So what has happened is she's had communication with Carrie Gibson from the nation, and the stage we're at right now is that they've come up with 4 names which translated mean things like children's play area or fun place, and things like that in English. But they've given us the names in what we call the language, Squamish, I guess. So we're at the point now where we're going to be going to the community and asking for them to really choose one of these 4 names. And then once that is done, we'll sort of proceed to getting signage done and having an opening, having a ceremony, but we'll probably delay that till the spring. And on the sign, which is going to have the name in the first language, there's going to be one of those, what do they call them, QR codes, so that you can hear the name pronounced. So I'm not quite sure how that works. I think you kind of point your phone at it or something like that, and then it says something on it tells you on your phone how to pronounce the name. Now, what's the regional implication of that? That whole process of involving the community, involving the nation, and working through this, and paying for it, because there are some costs involved, and I've got to work all that out yet. I'll be going to EAD in January for some help with that. The impact or the implication for the region is that it will give you a model that you can use for any new park or playground that you develop and you want to have a name for it. And you'll be able to use the process that Britannia has used to sort of guide your way through that. And I think what the intent is that when it's all said and done, we'll produce a kind of a report which will lay out the different stages and provide some guidance. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Mack.
Yeah, so for Area C and in partnership with the Village of Pemberton, the recreation facility that's being built at Dendar Park is a regional asset, in the sense that teams from throughout the corridor and the Lower Mainland will be able to come and play soccer there on the 2 soccer pitches. hopefully we'll get our baseball diamond done in the very near future. And that will in turn allow them to have tournaments and such. So I think that'll be just a wonderful thing to get that accomplished. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Herford.
Sure. Thank you. Councillor Stoner's update, I absolutely agree with. I'm going to take a slightly different course, although I could probably do a whole fill my time with layering on to that. The District of Squamish and Squamish Nation's first ever partnership has been the Community Forest Project. It's been underway. I think I'm the 6th or 7th mayor to work on this project, and been on the Community Forest Board throughout the last term. We hadn't until last week been issued the license. So we've actually crossed the finish line of the first phase, which has worked so hard to get to the start line. Now we have a community forest in Squamish, and I'm really excited about that. And technically, where the land base is outside of the district of Squamish, and so I think that there's a regional impact there as far as the overall forestry operations and continuing our great partnership with the Squamish Nation. So I'm quite excited about that, and you'll going into the new year, we'll start to hear more and more about that as sort of actions start to take place now, physically instead of just behind the scenes through 7 terms of humans. So I'm really excited about what can happen there. I think I'll also take the opportunity to mention our still relatively new housing society in Squamish, and which is coming up to a 1-year anniversary. But so much work is happening there, and we've seen some examples just in this last week of what I've been sort of calling spillover effect from our communities in the corridor, and I think it highlights the need for each of us and all of our, whether it's municipalities or areas, to take that affordable housing sort of piece to heart, and find ways to positively impact it wherever possible, because we are in such an interconnected area that a regional, whether it's a regional and hopefully a regional approach in future, but there's work underway in Squamish to sort of, I suppose, catch up. We're a little behind where Whistler's been, but it's very important work, and if it's not done correctly, then it spills on down the line. So but there's lots of really great work happening there, and hopefully you'll hear some more. We'll start racking up some victories there in the coming I want to say weeks, like months, no, but over the next long term, we'll get lots of good work coming out of that entity.
There is now a parliamentary secretary for the Ministry of Tourism, which is a big deal. That's a big change within government, and that's good news for us. And Whistler, I think, from sea to sky in the whole of the regional district. When you think about all of the tourism that's happening in South Chilcotin, Mountain Park, and the whole region, I think, will benefit from having a parliamentary secretary for tourism, and someone I think we should be in touch with. Tuesday, myself and a couple members of RMOW staff met with Lillooet Council to talk about the Sea to Sky Fire and Ice Geopark, which is proposed and in current consultation with the nations, with the Squamish and the Lillooet, and includes all kinds of just unbelievable sites that are sort of world class from, basically Squamish all the way into the northern part of the regional district. And I learned something, and so did our team learn something, that the term park is one that has got a lot of legacy negativity related to colonialism attached to it, because parks were used to take land. So that was a really interesting process to go through and to learn that. And Lillooet have been very generous to us as we've been learning this, because you come in and you think park, it's a great thing, a park. And then their generosity to say, hey, just so you know, that is not a term that is, as glowing as you may think. And so we're still going through the process of finding out whether this is something that, how this can move forward. And we're starting to talk about it as a georegion, because that is sort of maybe a better way of framing it. And that was a really good meeting, and grateful to them for their generosity in sharing that with us. It's an exciting, if you look at a couple of the spots where volcanic activity has interacted with glacial activity and created these crazy eskers and really neat geological features, I think it could be a pretty special entity in the future, and something that we hope be a great way for the Squamish and Lillooet to be sharing their culture as they see fit as well. So we'll see how it goes.
I'm going to add to that, because that's what I was going to talk about, is there's a website, fireandIcegeopark.ca. I was in Ottawa last week, and I was chatting with a woman who I had never met before. She's from Nova Scotia, and she said, where are you from? And I said, I'm from Western. She said, did you know that there's a geopark proposal in your area? And I said, I did know that. How did you know that? And she was from the community of the Cliffs of Fundy, which is an existing geopark in Nova Scotia. And she told me all about their process. It was like a 12-year application process and being certified, and like just incredible. And I've never been there, so I'm dying to go now because it sounds incredible. But to be in a place, and then that is what was, that was what she knew of Whistler, was that, and it's not in Whistler, it's sea to sky. It's not just Whistler Geopark, but I thought that was pretty cool to hear that from someone I'd never met before. So.
Sorry, you raised.
Jen, can I just add something as well?
Just a sec. I'm just gonna.
Yeah, just let Jack, and then I'll go to you.
Okay, thanks.
It's I should say it's a UNESCO
Yes.
geopark, which I also learned that UNESCO is United Nations Education, Science, and Culture is what UNESCO is. And so there's some interesting overlaps with like UNDRIP, since UNDRIP comes out of the United Nations. So this would be a sort of a good coming together of that work if it happens.
Yeah, awesome. Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, I was talking to Ruth Simons from the Howe Sound Biosphere Society, and the geopark actually overlaps with areas that are within the biosphere. So, and I know that the people that are behind the geopark have been talking to Ruth about cooperation in terms of promoting this whole region. And one of the things that they've raised is the possible, or I think it came from the Whistler group, the need for some kind of visitor center, and the feeling that if we're going to have a visitor center in the sea to sky, it should be towards the southern end, so that it can be a dual center for for Howe Sound and the biosphere region, and also for the geopark. So they're sort of looking at possible sites at the moment in the gateway to see the sky, which would be Furry Creek or Britannia Beach. So you may be hearing more of that to come, and you may even be getting a request for some kind of regional financial support or sub-regional financial support for that. So thank you.
Director Patton-Hill.
Yeah, I'm really quite excited because I've heard about the geopark, and it's quite exciting in relation to that cat somehow sound biosphere, and it ties into some things I wanted to make an attempt to thread together. So goal 11 in our RGS regional growth strategy is take action on climate change. 11I in particular is consider impacts to local community GHG emissions and decision making around GHG intensive industries and utilities, LNG, and commercial recreation and leisure operators. The reason I bring this up is the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada has a comment period open right now. Woodfibre has applied to reduce some of the ecological and environmental conditions on the project to facilitate a whole bunch of new greenhouse gas emissions right in the biosphere. So of course, this is, closes right at the holiday season. It started at the end of an election period when no one really has the capacity. But the comment period is open until the 19th, so next Monday, I believe. So if people share some of these concerns, I encourage them to go to the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, you can search for Woodfibre LNG, and you can comment on some of the things they've asked for. And I think this is quite, relevant to all of these discussions.
That's really important.
Chris,
Okay.
can you send us a link to the what you just mentioned?
Sure.
Let's make sure that we've got. Thank you.
The comment, I'm looking at the Fire and Ice site. It's absolutely beautiful, and I'm really pleased to see ancient cedars are one of the features. So
A huge feature.
very nice.
And it's not in one spot. It's really incredible. That was great. Thank you, guys.
That was a good idea, Chair. Make sure it's regional.
Yeah.
That helped me. I'll be talking about and
Soccer
there's
update.
the Whistler soccer team, 1-2-1.
NHL player.
Yeah.
Couldn't leave the brewery.
Okay, let's move along. We have a report from a director's remuneration 2021.
So
Moved. Second. Any questions? Anyone opposed? Motion carried. Okay, 10.1.
I'll declare a conflict of interest. As my daughter is employed by the BRVCA and the wife is a director.
Thank you. Okay. Would anyone like to move for letter of support? Moved by Director Richmond, second by Director Herford. Comments? Anyone opposed? Motion carried. All right.
I hope you didn't go too far.
Salvatore.
Okay.
It's a lot of argument.
Are you
I'll leave it open.
Yeah. All right, 10.2, there's a request for a letter of support from the District of Lillooet. Would anyone like to move this? Moved by Director Richmond, seconded by Director Demare. Comment? Anyone opposed? Motion carries.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. We have 10.3, which was an item removed from the consent agenda on the request of Director Demare. Do you want to speak to that?
Yes, I do. Yeah, it's interesting that they went back to the CWPP, Community Wildfire Protection Plan, which was done, I think, around 2018, 2019. And once I got elected, I went straight to the Cascades Forest District. And given that box, they never received it. And at that time, they only said they had a 100,000 or 200,000 for the whole Cascades Forest District for that program. And we didn't qualify. So recently, with the new surveys that are being done, community welfare resiliency plans, that's what they're looking for, actually. They're not looking for these CWPBs. And so it is quite convoluted. Tile Lake Ratepayers Association, they at one time had perimeter green belt that was given to them. Some of you might have heard of this before. And then when the ministries changed, they lost that file. So Cascades Forest District, we're working with them on this and decided to say, yeah, we'll do a fuel mitigation project for you to kind of compensate for it. And so that is actually in the works, but they're still waiting for that report for Area A and Area B, community wildfire resiliency plans, to do that. In the meantime, in the Marshall Lake area, the CWPP that was done earlier, I asked the proponent that created that document to give us a list of the priorities. What is the most important out of all these treatment units? There were a lot, as you can see by that document, that letter, and it was Marshall Lake. So all the treatment units around Marshall Lake were the #1 priority. If you remember, it was so close to that 2009 wildfire, just almost touched it. So they felt that was the most important. And so working with Mont-Lucier and the Cascades Forest District, they have actual wildfire personnel for these funds. I've asked that those two get in line once these community welfare plans are made, because they're waiting for those. The difference in the two plans was that the community welfare protection plan was done on a general overview from the welfare hazard maps that they have. And this new version, they actually go on the ground and survey the ground to make sure that it is needed. So there's quite a difference in the two. So that's where I'm at with it, and we're just waiting now for these welfare plans that should be here by the end of the year. So hopefully we can get some treatment units in A and B. It's been quite a go to try to get funding for our area. It's been really tough. Hasn't been easy. But that's kind of where it stands right now. So it's in the hands of our Mont-Lucier and the Cascades Forest District wildfire person.
Yeah, thanks to the chair. Just to add that with the capacity that now exists in protective services, it's on their work plan, and we're going to actively manage that issue, and reached out to Ministry of Forests in response to this letter, as you indicated, Maud and Mark, and so we'll be reporting not just direct to you and anybody else affected, any election areas affected, but it'll be part of our reporting as a work plan item. So you'll see information on that, and it'll get a little more focused, as you said, once those community wildfire resiliency plans are.
Yeah, it's definitely been. It is one of the key issues when you start seeing the OCP, all the updates that have been given, and the community input. It's one of the critical ones. Is fuel mitigation. You know, we do have the fire smart program, but that's for properties. But it's that other layer that's important. Yep.
Thank you.
That's
So
all
did you
that's
want to
really
do
done.
anything with that letter? Did you want to respond back
No.
to that letter?
No,
Okay.
things are on the go. I just
Okay.
want to kind of give an update to what's transpired.
Okay.
I spent a lot of time on it.
And there is a new minister there, and they have a slightly new mandate letter, so it's worthwhile to keep aware of the direction that ministry is going to go. I think there's a renewed interest in understanding how that interaction happens with regional districts, and because it even outlines that in the mandate letter. So thank you. With that, I guess we just need to move receipt.
Yeah, that's gonna suggest it. I'll do it.
Director Herford, seconded by Director Demare. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. There was the late business that was approved at the adoption of the agenda.
Item that was new, everybody.
Thank you, and that.
So that will be if the board votes
So-
to add it.
We have a motion to add the late business, moved by Director Birchfield, seconded by Director Crompton. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Now we're at 12.1. Silga is requesting nominations for executive, if anyone is interested, of the 1, 2, 3. To join their, or to put your name forward for a nomination for their board. Or we can think about it. The deadline is February 24th.
No. Shouldn't we say, we just nominated Barbara Weed for this, right? Or was that, or am I talking about the right?
No, that was for UBCM.
UBCM, we nominated Barbara Weed before Lori and I did, just so you. Silga is also asking for reps, and Barb has served on that board too, hasn't
She has, and I think she's been appointed because I think the Silga board got wiped off, but I do believe that somebody else might be interested in that position.
I nominate
Not recognizing
seldom.
names.
Well, I don't want to make the decision on the fly, but I think it's important that you think about it and come forward to the February or January meeting so that we're ready to put forward the nomination for the February deadline. Everyone good with that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is just to be received for consideration.
Should we defer it?
Yeah, motion to defer to the general meeting.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't think nominations actually require a motion of the board. There's just 2 people that need to sign it.
True.
Yeah.
So
You
we've
just
always
have to
done it as a
apply.
motion of the board, but it doesn't have to be. So we'll defer to January and then. Okay, come prepared.
What should we vote on?
No, we haven't yet. Do I have a motion? Moved by Director Herford, second by Director Crompton.
Yeah.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. To defer. Motion was to defer.
Yeah, that was the motion.
Next is
Absolutely.
the call for resolutions. I'm going to encourage everyone to attend the newly electeds. Either if you can, or if you can't, no problem, but make sure that someone you know is going to attend the newly elected, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong calendar here. In January, February. And the reason this is important is there will be a session on crafting good resolutions and why resolutions are important. And it's not to say that we haven't done that in the past, but we've always sort of left these resolutions to the last minute, and then we're kind of, let's do a resolution on this. And that's, we can use our power for much more impact if we do that.
Okay,
Go ahead.
I'll have 2 ready to go that'll come to the board.
Okay.
One is on Crown granted mineral claims and the issues around Crown granted mineral claims. People that have a Crown granted mineral claims cannot go to the Surface Rights Board to create a complaint. They have to go through the legal process of the to the law courts, unfortunately. So there'll be one on that, and there will also be another one on bodies 2-year quantified plans that local government should be able to receive those. Because we have no idea what they're doing. So those will be 2 that I'll be putting through to go to Silga.
Okay, so the suggestion would be that we refer this letter to the EAD in January. So that you can not only discuss the content of the resolution, but also understand the capacity of staff to support those resolutions. So that we have a fighting chance of getting this resolution supported by the area association. Fair?
Yep.
Cool, okay. So motion to defer to the EAD in January, moved by Director Hirsch. Pardon? Refer, not defer, refer. That's fine.
Motion to refer to the EAD in January.
Thank you, Director Birch Jones, seconded by Director Lemare. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And also, I think these community excellence awards are, they're awesome. It's incredible to see the projects that come forward. I would also ask for a motion to refer this correspondence to EAD.
So moved to refer that correspondence to the EAD in January.
Thank you. Seconded by Director Lemare. Anyone opposed? Motion carried. 12.4 was the letter of support request from the District of Squamish.
That we supply a letter of support for the grant application.
Okay. Seconded by Director Herford. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Any notice of motion? No. Okay. We're at 11:30.
There's no recommendations from the committee of the whole.
Right.
And then a motion to go into close, and if we could add, I don't know, which is potential litigation in
Thank you. Could I have a motion that we go into closed? Moved by Director Herford, seconded by Director Petgill. Anyone opposed? Motion carries.